My dad opened a restaurant near the university town. The restaurant only sells clams. It rained heavily today, and I thought there would be no customers coming to the restaurant. But I didn't expect that as soon as I opened the door, I saw a couple holding a transparent umbrella running in. These two people are strangers. After entering the door, the boy's eyes flashed with a trace of disgust. I don't like eating clams, a salty smell, disgusting. What do you know? The girl stood on tiptoe and whispered in the boy's ear, my mother has always complained about my father and said she wanted to divorce. But later, after my father ate the clam sashimi from this store, my mother obeyed my father in everything and never mentioned divorce again. The boy looked puzzled. Your mother obeyed your father in everything. What does it have to do with this clam shop? The girl's face flushed. Oh, don't you know that clams have the function of strengthening yang, and the clams in this shop have the strongest effect? She said it well. The clams in my house are more powerful than foreign strong medicines. Therefore, most of the customers who come to our house are male regulars. Boss, give me 2 servings of clam sashimi. The girl persuaded her boyfriend, walked to the cashier, scanned the code and said to me, pick the big ones to make sashimi. I laughed. This girl didn't know that the clams in my house are all the same size. They are like they grew out of the same mold, each of them is the same size and weight. Even the color of the skirt of the clam meat is the same. Dad, a guest is here. I went into the kitchen and said to my dad, the guest wants 2 servings of sashimi. Got it, you go out. While talking, my dad took out 2 clams that were bigger than his palm from the breeding tank. He skillfully split the clam shells, revealing the pink clam meat. There was a shiny color on the clam meat. I looked closely and found that it was actually a red nail. I began to wonder. Is this from my mother? But my mother never grows long nails, let alone paints them. Then, whose nail is this? At this time, my father looked up and saw that I hadn't left yet. He was a little angry. Why don't you go out? I was so scared that my whole body shuddered. My father never let me watch him cook. He said that I could only learn his skills after I got married. I hurried out of the kitchen. When closing the door, I saw my father gently wipe the stains on the clam shells with a soft towel, and said a few times, another small clam meat is going to go into other people's mouths. I thought it was incredible. In other stores, when making clam sashimi, they use a brush to brush the clam shells hard. But my father doesn't. He treats clams like fragile crystals, especially gently. Ah! I was about to leave, but suddenly heard a shrill scream from inside. It was my mother's voice. I was a little puzzled. I was in the kitchen just now, and I clearly didn't see my mother. At this time, my mother cried out in pain, Chongjun, I really can't live like this anymore. I beg you, please close the store and stop making clams, okay? If I don't cook clams, who will feed you mothers? My dad was obviously not happy. He yelled, today an old customer made an appointment with me for 15 clams, you hurry up and get some clams. My dad's clam dishes are unique. He has a rule for cooking, only selling 20 clams a day. After selling them, he closes the store. Recently, I have been with my dad, but I have never seen him go to the fresh food market to buy clams. My dad said that these clams were raised by himself. But these days, I have never seen him go to the farm, but my dad is like a magician, always able to bring out 20 raw materials from the kitchen. Today, I want to see how my dad can make clams out of nothing. I deliberately walked lightly and peeked through the crack in the door. My old customer will be here soon. In the kitchen, my father waved his hand at my mother impatiently, hurry up and take out the clams. Chongjun, if you don't close the store, I will really die. In the kitchen, my mother shed tears and slowly lifted her long skirt. I widened my eyes in shock. My father asked my mother to take the clams, but why did my mother lift her skirt? I suddenly remembered that my mother had strictly forbidden me and my sister. She said that the clams at home must not be eaten. I asked, why not? My mother said that the clams at home have a strong taste and are extremely nutritious. If a girl eats them, she will be so nutritious that she will die of fanaticism. But I was still greedy and couldn't help wanting to eat. That day, when I was serving clam sashimi to the guests, I accidentally fell and dropped a piece of clam meat. I secretly stuffed the piece of meat into my mouth and ate it. I have to say that the taste was salty and astringent, but also a bit plump, which was endless aftertaste. And I didn't feel any discomfort after eating it. Now that I think about it, the reason why my mother didn't let me eat clams was probably because of Because of the method. Just when I was about to have a disgusting thought, my mother suddenly let down her skirt and shouted, "Pingxing, what are you doing standing at the door?" My whole body froze. My parents hate me peeping the most. My dad said that the craft of raising and cooking clams will only be passed on to me after I get married and have a husband. Because I am not married yet. So I can't even touch the family craft. I can't even watch it for a while. Pingxing, are you peeping? My mother covered her lower abdomen and walked towards me trembling. The moment she opened the door, a strong salty smell came to my face. I hurriedly made a gesture to knock on the door and complained, "Mom and Dad, are the two sashimi ready? The guests are waiting." My mother looked at me suspiciously. "You didn't look inside just now? What are you looking at?" I looked confused and shouted to my father in the room, "Dad, the guests are waiting impatiently and are leaving. Let the guests wait patiently for a while." My mother stared at me for a long time, making sure that I was not lying, and closed the door again. This time, she lowered the door curtain. The inside was covered tightly, and I couldn't see anything. Not long after, 3 more customers came to the store. They were obviously the regular customers my father mentioned. After entering the door, a man with gold teeth in his mouth and a very wretched appearance shouted, "Boss, are the 15 clams ready? Remember, I want 5 steamed, 5 stewed, and 5 original flavors." Okay. My father's promise came from the kitchen. "It's been prepared for a long time, and it will be on the plate soon." I hurried to the door of the kitchen and took the food from the gap in the door. The clam meat in front of me was pink and thin, sprinkled with some lemon juice, and decorated with a small pink flower, which matched the mustard green plating, which was extremely pleasing to the eye. I held the food in my hand and walked towards the couple. "Wait." A fat man from the group of customers who just came stopped me. He pointed at the food in my hand and muttered, "Why does your clam smell like a corpse?" The smell of corpse? I was stunned. I always knew that the smell of my clams was a little stronger than that of ordinary markets. But, it shouldn't be the smell of corpse, right? I don't want to eat it anymore. The boy in the couple in front of me suddenly stood up and said with disgust, "I don't want to eat this disgusting smell." The girl hurriedly grabbed his hand, "The dishes are all here, isn't it a waste if you don't eat it?" I held the food and hurriedly said, "Yes, the sashimi is here, at least try it before making a decision." "Wait, girl, don't be impatient." The fat man next to me reached out to stop me. "I want to ask you, where did you get this clam from? Why does it smell like a corpse?" As he spoke, he reached out to grab a piece of sashimi and sniffed it. My clams are very expensive, one serving costs 1,000 yuan. If he touches this clam, the couple will definitely not eat it again. I was holding the tray and preparing to go around, but the fat man continued to pester me. "Don't worry, I just smell it, I won't waste the ingredients." "Fatty, what are you doing?" When I was embarrassed, the man with gold teeth stood up. He patted the fat man's shoulder and said, "I am a regular customer of this store. How can I not taste anything? You are a tomb robber for a long time." Cough cough cough. The man with gold teeth seemed to have thought of something, and he coughed violently, and then said, "You are a funeral home for a long time. Everything you smell is like the stench of corpses." The fat man arched his nose hard and muttered with some self-doubt, "Is it really because I have been squatting in the funeral home for a long time?" The first steamed dish is ready. Not long after, my father came out with the food himself. But his face was not very good. He put it in front of the gold-toothed man and said gloomily, "Big gold teeth, your friend does dirty work, so his eyes and nose are naturally dirty. But I do clean business." If you slander me, don't come to my house again. Big Gold Teeth nodded hurriedly, with a bit of flattery. Yes, yes, my happiness in the second half of my life depends on your clams. After that, he patted the fat man's head. Damn it, if you like it, eat it, if you don't like it, get out. I successfully put the sashimi food on the couple's table. The boy took a small bite of the clam meat due to his girlfriend's request. The next moment, the boy's frown relaxed, and he didn't even want to say more. He picked up dozens of chopsticks of meat and stuffed them all into his mouth. I stood aside and looked at them silently. The guests who come to my store, as long as they have tasted the clam meat once, will immediately show a greedy look of wolfing it down. But Degenia was an exception. He was a very wealthy regular customer. He was a little particular about eating steamed clams. He took a bite and chewed it slowly in his mouth. He also said, eating this clam meat should be like eating ginseng fruit. You have to taste it slowly, otherwise it would be a waste. The fat man stuffed the whole thing into his mouth, raised his thumb, and spit out a few words from the gap between his teeth. It smells bad, but it tastes good. Another boy who was traveling with them, he had a handsome appearance and a tall figure. When he ate clams, he was very gentle. Unlike Degenia's pretentiousness, he was neither arrogant nor impatient, neither hurried nor slow, just like the ancient kings and nobles eating. Kings and nobles? People like him are definitely rich. So, how could he be with the undertaker who cremated corpses in the funeral home? My whole body froze. Suddenly I thought of what Degenia had just said with a strong cough. He said that the fat man had been robbing tombs for a long time. Grave robbers. A terrifying guess came to my mind. The fat man might really be a grave robber. Grave robbers are very sensitive to the smell of corpses. Could it be that the clams in my house really smell like corpses? I suddenly thought of the nail in the kitchen. Red nails, smelly clams, my mother's skirt hem lifted with tears. My brain began to be confused. But I couldn't stand this feeling of fear and confusion. I thought that I could only know the source of the clams if I stayed in the kitchen for a night. Late at night. I bent over and just hid in the water tank when I heard the door being pushed open. My father and mother came in. Chongjun, close the store. We have made enough dirty money. My mother kept crying and sobbing. Besides, I'm really tired of this torture. You ask me to take out the clams every day. Do you know that you are killing me? If you continue like this, I will really die. My father was very impatient. Hold on a little longer, wait until Pingxing gets married. Before he finished speaking, there was a sound of plastic aging and breaking. I was shocked to realize that the water tank covering me was broken due to aging. What are you hiding here for? My father was sharp-eyed and saw me at once. He was extremely furious, strode in front of me, pulled my arm and dragged me to the door. The kitchen is not a place you can just come to casually. I was thrown out. Do you want to know the secret of the source of clams in the family? My sister came over at some point. She did not enter the store. She just stood on the threshold of the store door. She looked at me and said, "It's very simple to know the secret. You just need to find a boyfriend to get married, and then your parents will tell you everything about clams, right?" Get married? With the precedent of my sister, I dare not get married at all. My sister was married. But on the wedding night, the groom died. The forensic examination showed that he died of sudden death. After that, my sister seemed to have changed. She used to stick to my parents. But now she hates my parents very much, always saying that my parents ruined her life. And after my brother-in-law died, my sister never set foot in the store again. It was as if there was something dirty in the store. Pingxing, I'll tell you something in secret. My sister waved at me. You should have noticed that Mom's health is getting worse day by day, right? I think Mom is dying soon. She said word by word, you can only help Mom and get rid of her pain if you get married. I have considered what my sister said. I want to help my mother. But I am afraid that my boyfriend will die on the wedding night, like my brother-in-law. I love my boyfriend Qingshan very much. He is very good-looking and has a high degree of education. He is a master's degree holder. I always feel inferior to him more or less when I am with him. But Qingshen never despises me. He could have gone abroad for a better job, but for me, he was willing to work in the province. I am in his future plans at every step. But I dare not grow old with him. Ding dong. At this time, my mobile phone rang. It was Qingshen. He said, Xiaoxing, where are you? I know a place with a fireworks show. Can I take you to see it? The fireworks show is only at night. If I go out with Qingshen, I will definitely not be able to go home at night, so I can only live with him in the hotel. When a single man and a single woman live in the same room, things that shouldn't happen will definitely happen. I hesitated a little. Pingxing, go ahead. My mother came out from the kitchen. Her legs were shaking and her face was pale. You are already in your 20s. If you don't get married, you may not be able to find a good family. My father set rules for my sister and me when we got married. The first night of the newlyweds must be spent in the clam shop. My brother-in-law died in the clam shop. When he died, his body was wet and there was a lingering fishy smell. I felt inexplicably scared. Mom, what if my boyfriend dies after marrying me? Silly child, what are you thinking about? How can people die so easily? My mother seemed to know my doubts. She forced a smile and said, your brother-in-law died suddenly. He was just too excited on the wedding night and died suddenly. I was silent. My mother was lying to me just now. When my brother-in-law married my sister, he went to the hospital for a physical examination. The examination report showed that my brother-in-law was in very good health. So, my brother-in-law's sudden death was definitely not an accident. Seeing that I had been silent, my mother got a little anxious. Pingxing, am I too good to you? You are used to this comfortable life and don't want to get married and suffer for me? I immediately widened my eyes. Mom, what do you mean? Why would I suffer for you if I get married? My father has said this to me many times. After getting married, I can inherit the clam craftsmanship of my family. But from what my mother meant, is inheriting the clam craftsmanship a kind of suffering? In fact, I am not afraid of suffering. My family conditions have always been good. My family can earn more than 600,000 yuan a month. 15 since childhood, my sister and I have always lived a very wealthy life, and we have everything we want. I know very well that this is what my parents earned from running a clam shop. If I can suffer for my parents after getting married, I am willing. I am just afraid. I am afraid that Qingshen will die strangely like my brother-in-law. I went to the fireworks show in the suburbs with Qingshen. I only heard a crisp sound of whistling. In the dark night sky, colorful fireworks began to bloom, and the fireworks formed countless stars. The stars were bright, but fleeting. But when it was about to disappear, another variety of stars bloomed. I couldn't help laughing. In this warm and prosperous atmosphere, Qingshen suddenly conjured up a bunch of beautiful blue roses. Pingxing, I love you. His dark eyes stared at me deeply. You know, you are my star, I want to spend the future with you. Then, he knelt on one knee and took out a diamond ring. Pingxing, are you willing to marry me? I realized that this fireworks show was actually prepared by him for me. Qingshen's family conditions are not very good. He is not rich. However, he took out his not much savings just to please me. I covered my lips in surprise. I have seen fireworks. I have seen a lot of fireworks. But I have never seen fireworks that belong to me. Promise him, promise him. At some point, people around us gathered around us. They smiled brightly, their eyes were filled with envy, and they shouted at me to promise Qingshen. I once owned a building of luxury goods. I once thought that I was immune to material things. But now, my heart is beating wildly. My heart is beating so fast. It even makes me a little dizzy. That night, the sky in the distance was bright with fireworks. The man nearby was handsome and his eyes were affectionate. I also lost my reason. Qingshen and I went to a nearby hotel. Everything happened naturally. In the middle of the night, the moonlight was bright, and the white moonlight poured through the gauze curtain onto the man next to me. I stared at Qingshan quietly. He slept soundly and fragrantly, with the corners of his mouth unconsciously raised slightly. But I felt a little more uneasy in my heart. My father told me more than once that my first man must marry me so that I can inherit the family's clams. But what if Qingshan dies unexpectedly like my brother-in-law? I began to make up my mind. For Qingshan's safety, I must not let my father know that I have been with Qingshan. At this time, a mobile phone vibrated. It was a message from Qingshan's phone. The light of his phone was dazzling. I subconsciously wanted to turn off the phone screen. But I saw a WeChat message on it. Shen, did you succeed? Do you feel disgusted when you sleep with her? My body stiffened instantly. Unprecedented disappointment, anger, disgust and other emotions surged into my mind. I resisted the urge to kill and opened WeChat on my phone. It was a message from a person with the note: Boss, to Qingshan, Shen, when you get 1 million from that woman, we will go to live abroad, okay? Qingshan replied, okay, my baby, I will take you to any country you want to go. The boss said again, Shen, you know, my heart broke when I saw you kneeling down to propose to that woman. Alas, Shen, it's hard for you to bite that ugly woman. Qingshan made a helpless expression. There's no way, for our future happy life, I can't bite her, but I have to bite her. I stared at Qingshan straight. At this time, the moonlight was still bright. But Qingshan, who was originally handsome, became inexplicably hideous. I gave him my most precious thing. I even worried that he would die unexpectedly after becoming my husband. I had thought about it and cheated on my dad for him. But what about him? He played both sides. I clenched the phone tightly and laughed in anger. Qingshan, it's hard for you to bite an ugly woman like me for 1 million. I set the message to unread status and put the phone next to his pillow. Then, I called my dad. Dad, I will marry my boyfriend tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to it. Looking forward to the tragic death of Qingshan tomorrow. And, looking forward to the secret of producing fat clams at home. On the other end of the phone, my dad responded happily, we are also very satisfied with Qingshan. When you come back tomorrow, take the household registration book and go to the Civil Affairs Bureau with Qingshan to get the marriage certificate. I was suddenly stunned. In front of my parents, I have always called Qingshan Shen. In theory, my parents should not know Qingshan's full name. But why did my dad say Qingshan's name so accurately now? I hesitated for a while and tried carefully. Dad, I suddenly feel a little regretful. I still don't want to marry Qingshan. No. My dad's tone suddenly became furious. Pingxing, you should remember very clearly that I have told you many times that the first man who has slept with you must become your husband. Do you think I don't know that you and Qingshan are in the hotel now? I just felt a cold sweat on my back. My dad, how did he know that I was with Qingshan now? Did he install a positioning system on my phone? I quickly opened the phone settings, and there was no trace of GPS settings on it. Then my dad, how did he know? On the other end of the phone, my dad yelled impatiently, Pingxing, I tell you, if you don't marry Qingshan, you and Qingshan will die within 3 days. I mustered up the courage to say, Dad, if I marry him, will I know all the secrets of the family? My dad's voice gradually calmed down, yes. Okay, I will go to the Civil Affairs Bureau with Qingshan tomorrow. The next morning, I opened my eyes and saw Qingshan sitting beside me, holding his phone and replying to messages quickly. I smiled and said, Shen, what are you doing? Are you chatting with your lover? Qingshan's face was flustered for a moment. But he hid it very well. He sighed slightly and said, today is the weekend, but my boss gave me a task and asked me to do something. That's right. The boss gave him the task of making 1 million from me. I couldn't help laughing when I thought about this. My family's monthly income is more than 600,000. 1 million is only 2 months for my family. Qingshan is a worldly wise money grubber after all. 1 million can buy his life. Pingxing, what are you laughing at? Qingshan saw that I didn't say anything, and couldn't help wondering, it seems that I went to work, you are very happy? No. I restrained my smile and looked at him seriously. Shen, don't go to work, I will support you in the future. Ah? Qingshan's face was very shocked. But the corners of his mouth were smiling uncontrollably. He clenched his fists, leaned on the corners of his mouth, and tried his best to restrain his smile and said, how can a woman support a man? You really don't want me to support you? I shrugged lazily, then forget it. Qingshan's expression was visibly lost. I was extremely contemptuous in my heart. This man, obviously a money grubber. But he pretended to be out of touch with the world. Shen, I want to marry you. I didn't want to tease Qingshan anymore. I just wanted to kill this scumbag as soon as possible. So, I held his hand and said word by word, you should know that I gave you my most precious thing, so I plan to get the marriage certificate with you today. Qingshan's face was flustered and at a loss again, this. So soon? I frowned, why? Don't you want to marry me? Ah Shen, maybe you don't know my family conditions. My family has 10 buildings that can't be counted on your fingers. No, that's not what I mean. Qingshan said hurriedly, I have to discuss with my family and let them prepare. He stood up and made a phone call on the balcony. The person he called was probably his white moonlight last night, boss, right? The sound insulation of this hotel is very good. I couldn't hear what he said through a layer of glass. But from his expression, I saw hesitation and desperate viciousness. More than 10 minutes later, Qingshan said the answer that would make him regret for the rest of his life. He said, Pingxing, let's go get the marriage certificate. On the way back from the Civil Affairs Bureau, after getting the marriage certificate, I told Qingshan about my family's newlywed rules. What? We have to spend the first night of our marriage in your store? Qingshan didn't quite understand. He frowned, your store is very close to the vegetable market, and there is a fishy smell. This is our family's rule. I took his arm and entered my store. It was around 9 o'clock in the morning, and the customers in the store had not arrived yet. Most of the clams my father made were regular customers. Among them were many high-ranking officials and dignitaries. They tried several times to monopolize my father's store and asked my father to make clam meat only for them. But my father had a very strange request. Clam meat cannot be packaged, it can only be eaten on the spot. After Qingshan entered the store, my father looked him up and down, not bad, a good seedling to succeed me in the future. My mother's pale face finally showed a little smile. She patted my shoulder, Pingxing, our clam shop will depend on you and your wife in the future. Depend on us? Qingshan's eyes were filled with disgust. He subconsciously said, Auntie. No, Mom, I'm a master's degree holder. You ask me to cook in this small place every day. I really can't do it. But not everyone can cook in my small place. My dad snorted coldly, my eldest son-in-law doesn't have this blessing. I don't want this blessing. Qingshan has a bit of scholar's arrogance in his bones. He said, Dad, I have a regular position in the unit, and I may not be able to take over your shop. He works in a public institution, but because his family is not very well off, his leaders always control him, and even deliberately assign him some trivial work on weekends. If Qingshan wants to climb up, he has to do it. If he doesn't want to climb up, he can only be an ordinary grassroots in his life. My dad pointed to the menu on the wall and said calmly, working in this store for a month is equivalent to working in your company for a lifetime. Qingshan saw the price above, his face twitched, and he couldn't help but say, this is so expensive, which fool would come to eat? As soon as he finished speaking, a man in a black jacket came over. Boss, 2 servings of clear soup clams. The man sat in an inconspicuous corner next to him with ease. He jokingly said, Boss, I'm also a regular customer here. Can you give me a 20% discount? My dad said expressionlessly, no. My dad made clams. The cheapest portion is clam sashimi, which costs 1,000 yuan per portion. Others that take a little more time to steam and cook cost 1,000 yuan or more. At this time, Ching Shen, who was standing next to me, was full of joy and excitement. He leaned close to my ear and whispered, "This man is the top leader in my company." "Big leader?" Ching Shen shouted and immediately walked towards the man in the black jacket. The man was obviously stunned. "Who are you?" Ching Shen flattered, "Leader, I am Xiaoqing from the unit." The leader still looked confused. Ching Shen immediately said, "I am Xiaoqing, who graduated from Hangzhou University and just joined the unit not long ago." The leader nodded and refused to say more. Ching Shen asked again, "Leader, do you like the clam meat in this restaurant?" The leader obviously didn't want to deal with Ching Shen more, nodded again, and looked down at the phone. Ching Shen couldn't wait to say, "Leader, if you want to eat it, why come here in person? I will send it to you every day in the future." The leader laughed out loud. But he did not expose Ching Shen, and only said, "Thank you, I don't need your kindness." Ching Shen sensed the irony in the leader's smile, and hurriedly said, "Leader, the owner of this store is my father-in-law." The leader's eyes lit up and his smile softened. "Really? Coincidentally, my father came out of the kitchen. Yes, Ching Shen is indeed my son-in-law." With my father's certification, the leader immediately stood up. He walked in front of Ching Shen and patted Ching Shen on the shoulder. "Young man, you have a bright future." Ching Shen stood straight, but pretended to be modest. "Everything is thanks to the leader's cultivation." I watched this scene from the side, and I felt so disgusted that goosebumps appeared. This is Ching Shen I have never seen before. In the past, in my impression, Ching Shen was a handsome boy with a lot of knowledge, but now, he looks ugly and disgusting. Ching Shen bent his waist again and poured water for the leader. "Leader, what flavor of clam meat do you like best? I will put it on your desk every day in an insulated box." At this time, my father glanced at him and said lightly, "But the rule of our clam shop is that we don't accept takeout. People have to eat now." Ching Shen's face began to look embarrassed. My dad has always had a bad temper. When other provincial leaders came, my dad was still so cold. Ching Shen's leader obviously knew my dad's temper very well. He laughed a few times and said, "Boss, is the clear soup clam meat cooked?" After being slapped in the face, Ching Shen turned around and prepared to leave the store. But strangely, his body seemed to be out of control and he couldn't walk out of the store door. He looked at me in horror. What's going on?" I turned my head and looked at my dad. My dad said word by word, "You must take over this store after you get married to my daughter and get the certificate." After sunset, late night soon came. According to the rules, tonight, I have to spend the night with Ching Shen in the clam store. My dad took Ching Shen and me into the kitchen. I started to get nervous for no reason. Soon, I will know the secret of the clam meat at home. My dad closed the kitchen door and turned on the light again. In the bright white, he knocked on the wall behind the door regularly. With a click, a small square space about 60 centimeters long and wide appeared on the ground, just enough for one person to enter. This is the entrance to a basement. The entrance is very deep, with a bottomless staircase. As soon as the hole was opened, a fishy smell came out. My father looked at me and said, "This basement has all the secrets you want to know." He added, "If you want to go in, remember to take off all your clothes." After that, my father left the kitchen and closed the kitchen door. Ching Shen looked at me half-jokingly, "There won't be your family's treasure in here, right?" Although he said so, he refused to go in. Outside the kitchen, my father's voice came, "Since you have become my son-in-law, if you don't come in, you will die within 3 days." Ching Shen looked hesitant. I hesitated for a while, took off my clothes, covered my nose, and went into the basement first. Soon, Ching Shen also took off his clothes, and followed him down in one go. This basement is very deep and the stairs are very long. The corridor was illuminated by dim lights. As I walked down the stairs, the fishy smell at the tip of my nose became stronger. After walking for about 2 minutes, I finally reached the ground. I groped the wall and turned on the light. The scene in front of me suddenly became brighter, but it made me feel more depressed. This is a very low basement. After Qingshan came in, he kept his waist bent and his head tilted. The area in front of me was about 20 square meters. There was a pool in front of me. There were 2 coffins in the pool, and 2 black clams that were nearly 2 meters long and 1 meter wide. The coffin was open, and the rotten smell came from the coffin mouth. I didn't dare to get close to the coffin, so I walked towards the big clam. Thanks to my parents, I have traveled to many places abroad and seen many strange things. But I have never seen such a big clam. It was so big that I even had the illusion that these 2 big clams were not real, but decorations. But when I got closer, I realized the clams in front of me were real. As I approached, one of the clams quietly opened its shell, revealing the smelly but red clam meat. Ah! As the arc of its opening became larger and larger, I screamed in horror. This clam. There was actually a person stuffed in its clam meat. This person was obviously a girl. She was lying face down, and I couldn't see her appearance. However, I could see her hands hanging on both sides. These hands had rotted to the bone. There were still a few pieces of red, shiny nails falling off around the fingers. So, the nails I saw on the clam meat yesterday were from this woman? Who is this woman? When I had doubts in my mind, a strange voice suddenly appeared in my mind. She is your sister. The strange voice said again, now, turn her over and put her in the coffin. What? I widened my eyes. Who was talking to me? At the same time, Qingshan ran towards me. Pingxing, did you hear someone talking? I heard it. I looked at Qingshan in horror. Did you hear someone talking to you too? Qingshan had already run to my side. He also saw the dead body in front of him. He looked terrified and trembled. Your father killed someone. Put her in the coffin. At this time, the voice in my mind said emotionlessly, if you don't want to die, you have to do it. Qingshan turned around and ran without thinking. But the next second, his feet seemed to be broken by a pair of invisible hands. With a click, Qingshan's leg was broken. The voice appeared in my mind again, turn her over quickly and put her in the coffin. Qingshan probably received such instructions. His face was painful and hideous, but he still dragged his broken leg and crawled back to the giant clam. Because of fear, my body was stiff and did not move. Soon, a pain like a knife cutting flesh came from my flesh. The pain forced me to surrender. Finally, Qingshan and I took the hands and feet of the female corpse and began to move them to the coffin. The moment the female corpse was lifted up, I saw her appearance clearly. She was actually my sister. My mother gave birth to 3 daughters in total. I am not very familiar with this sister. She has been studying abroad since she was a child. Later, she met a gangster late at night and was shot to death. But now, how could she appear here? I was full of fear and confusion. At this time, a voice appeared in my mind again, there is another body, move him into the coffin. The voice ended. I saw another big clam open its shell. I suddenly understood. The strange voice in my mind came from the 2 clams in front of me. There was also a corpse lying in the clam meat of this clam. This person was an old man lying on his back. The old man's body was even more rotten. But the strange thing was that there was no sign of decay on his face, and he looked as if he was asleep with his eyes closed. Although I have never seen the old man, I have seen his photo. He is my grandfather, who has been dead for many years. In shock, I couldn't help but slow down my movements, and the knife-like pain reappeared. Qingshan couldn't bear it and yelled at me, move the body into the coffin quickly. I did it again. After moving both bodies into the coffin, all the truth about the clams began to emerge in my mind. My parents were not so rich at the beginning. Before I was born, my parents were still fishermen, so poor that they could not even afford food. One day, my grandfather went out fishing and caught these 2 giant clams. It happened to be thunderstorm weather, and my grandfather's boat was hit by the waves, capsized, and drowned in the sea. When my father went to retrieve my grandfather's body, he saw the 2 giant clams and took them home. That night, the giant clam appeared in my father's dream. The giant clam told my father that as long as my family supported it from generation to generation, my family would have countless money from generation to generation. My father was afraid of poverty and agreed to the giant clam's request. After that, the giant clam was able to communicate with my father in his mind. The requirement for supporting this giant clam is to support it with the body of a dead relative. So my father offered my grandfather's body to the giant clam. Later, my sister died unexpectedly abroad. My parents chartered a plane and tried every means to offer my sister's body to the giant clam. In return, the two giant clams will produce 20 clams every day. These 20 clams have a super strong and strange effect, which also leads to a constant stream of people coming to my family's store. My family's money is like water, flowing in endlessly. But the giant clam's requirements are not as simple as just providing for them. Every night, my father has to take the bodies of his loved ones out of the giant clams and place them in the coffin. At dawn, my mother will place the bodies in the clam meat and then take 20 clams from the pool. To enter the basement, in order to prevent the clams from being contaminated, you must go down naked. Therefore, my mother lifted her skirt that day just to take off her clothes. My mother couldn't stand it. She has claustrophobia. Most importantly, she couldn't accept that her daughter was always in the clam instead of being buried. In addition, my mother is now rich, and she can't stand being controlled by the giant clams. So, she cried and begged my father several times to close the clam shop. But my mother didn't know. Feeding the giant clam is like feeding a ghost, it can never be interrupted. Otherwise, the giant clam will take your life. The only way to get rid of the giant clam is for me to get married and feed the giant clam on behalf of my parents. And it is not surprising that my father knows Qingshen's name. That's just because the giant clam told my father that it has taken a fancy to Qingshen. The death of my brother-in-law is even simpler. The giant clam looked down on my brother-in-law, but my brother-in-law has already known the family secret, so he must die. Now, Qingshen and I have taken over the feeding and inheritance of the giant clam. My parents are completely relieved. I finally know the secret of the clam at home. So horrifying and bizarre. But it really happened. At this time, Qingshen, who was next to him, knelt down in front of the giant clam. He said in fear and anxiety, "I have moved the body into the coffin. Can I go out now?" I began to understand. Qingshen didn't know everything I knew about the secret of the clam just now. I walked towards the giant clam, reached out and touched the clam shell, and asked it in my heart, "Is it only the closest relatives who can support you?" The next second, a voice began to emerge in my mind, "Yes." I smiled at the corner of my lips and looked at Qingshen again. "Shen, you really want 1 million, right?" Qingshen was stunned for a moment. How do you know?" He immediately figured out that I saw the chat record between him and his boss. He started to get angry. "If I had known your family was so weird, I would never have married you for 1 million. I looked at him coldly, and asked the giant clam in my heart, "Can a living person's body also support you?" The giant clam said, "I'd love to." I smiled, "Then I'll give you my dear husband." Then, I turned and walked towards the stairs. Qingshen saw that I could walk out, and Liu also wanted to follow me. He shouted, "I want to go out too. I must call the police to expose the source of your family's dirty money." He spoke quickly and full, completely unaware that his broken legs made him unable to move. Finally, I left the basement. And Qingshen stayed here forever. My dad looked puzzled when he saw Qingshen didn't come out. I said calmly, "He is a scumbag, and scumbags must die. In our family shop, men and women have always divided the work. Men carry corpses, and women go to pick clams in the morning." My dad looked at me and said, "Now that Qingshen is dead, you will have to do the work of carrying corpses in the future. Can you bear it?" I smiled, "Of course. I can do what Qingshen can do. It's just a little harder. But I'm not afraid of hard work." My parents have been supporting the giant clams for more than 20 years. They have been doing it for 10 years. Although they have a huge amount of money in their hands, they have never left the city because they are bound by the giant clams. And in the past 20 years, I have lived a life of luxury and have everything I want. So, it's time for me to contribute. I have no regrets. I officially accepted the clam shop at home. The next day, I went into the basement to pick up clams. I saw Chingshin's body. His face was twisted and horrible, and his eyes were staring straight at the exit of the basement. Did he die with his eyes open? Oh, when he cheated on me, why didn't he think that this day would come? The voice of the giant clam began to appear in my mind. New arrival, now let's take your grandfather out and bury him. I replied okay. Then, I struggled to put Chingshin's body into the giant clam shell that slowly opened. Later, I kept this clam shop. I also met a man who was in love with me. But I didn't marry him, let alone have children. I became richer and richer, with a lot of money, and men around me approached me like flies. But I no longer have the sincerity and passion I once had for Chingshin. I only saw the bright stars and fireworks that belonged to me once. Once, it was enough. 60 years later. My parents have died. The giant clam asked me to move my parents' bodies to the basement. I didn't agree. It threatened me, aren't you afraid that I will kill you? I laughed. I have lived for more than 80 years. It is worth it to die. It threatened me again, aren't you afraid that I will kill your sister? I didn't care, my sister has enjoyed the wealth of the family, but has never contributed to the family. She deserves to die. 7 days later, a foul smell gradually emanated from the clam shop that had been in business for more than 100 years. Some enthusiastic people called the police. The police opened the door and found 4 bodies in the basement after a search. A female body that died abroad and should have been cremated. A male master's degree body that disappeared mysteriously 60 years ago, Chingshin. There were also 2 bodies that died recently. The owner of the clam shop and his sister. The cause of death, sudden death, due to palpitations. After the police announced the death of the owner, a lawyer came out soon. The lawyer said that the owner of this shop donated all of her tens of billions of assets to the charity industry free of charge a few dozen days ago. It is easier to invite gods than to send them away. I don't want my parents to become a body without dignity after they die. So, I expected that if I didn't do what the giant clam did, I would die. I am really not afraid of death. But before I die, I have to make some preparations. I will donate all the money I earned from running the store for free. I just hope that there will be no more poor people in the world. I hope that there will be no more transactions with giant clams and selling the bodies of my loved ones. When I was about to die, I couldn't help but smile. Dad, I have never married again in my life. The deal you made with the giant clam, because of greed, has completely ended with me. The end.